Our gospel reading today comes to us from the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents have sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been born blind and received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." The parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been born blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never, since the world began, has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that he had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." One of the many things I am thankful for each morning when I wake up is that I can open my eyes and see the world around me. I don't have to put my glasses on to see. I don't have to put my glasses on to see the time on my phone, because honestly, it's usually way too early. I don't have to put on my glasses to see the cat on the floor on my way to the bathroom, yet unfortunately they do still sometimes blend in with the darkness of the room around me. I can move about fairly comfortably without my glasses for a day if I want to. I just get a migraine if I go for too long without them, because it does put strain on my eyes. But nonetheless, I can see. The same is not true for my husband. I often hear Joe in the mornings grumbling under his breath as he fumbles around the floor beside his bed, looking for the glasses that he has once again knocked off of the side table. If he is not wearing his glasses or contacts, he cannot see much of anything outside of blurs of color and general shapes. He cannot see details. He cannot read or drive or walk safely without his glasses. But with his glasses, he's able to move safely. He can see when Leela's face needs washed because of all the chocolate on it, or that I have a string hanging off my sweater that needs trimmed. The glasses correct his vision so that he is not walking through the world blind, but sighted with clarity and clear confidence. However, literal sight is not something, or not the only thing in which we talk about being blind. Blind is a word we use when we are talking about how we missed something or we were fooled by something. We hear things like, "I was so blinded by how much fun I was having with that person that I never noticed how cruel they were." Or, "I was so blinded by their good looks I didn't realize how shallow they were, or how mean they were, or how abusive they were," or on and on. We can be blind to the nature of someone's personality, or blind to people's motives. We talk about being blindsided by events. And often it is used this way because the literal act of sight does not always mean that we are truly seeing the situation. From our lesson passages today, these two ideas of sight and of blindness are not new or unique to our modern era. Rather, we humans have always struggled with blindness and with truly seeing. In our Old Testament passage, we read about Samuel being told by God to anoint the next king, as Saul has been rejected by God as the ruler of the Israelites. Samuel is saddened by this, as Samuel anointed Saul as the first king. But nonetheless, he follows God's direction. He sets out for Bethlehem to seek out Jesse. God says that he has chosen one of Jesse's sons to be the next ruler for the nation of Israel. So Jesse, 7 of his sons, and Samuel are sanctified and make a sacrifice to God before starting the process of discernment. First comes the eldest son, a large, strapping man, and Samuel is impressed and thinks, "Well, surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord." But God says back, "Not so fast. Don't be fooled by his appearance. I have looked not at his outside, but inside his heart. He is not the one." It is a simple fact of human nature that we are quick to judge people by how they look. Research has shown this time and again. We judge people on their attractiveness, on if they look friendly or have a perpetual sour look on their face. We judge them by what they are wearing and how well kept they look. We make snap judgments based on people's race and ethnicity, which is deeply problematic as well. It's not hard to think about how this works. Let's think about a farmer's market. A regular farmer's market out on a beautiful day like today, and you see people walking around. There's a well-built, athletic, tall, black man in loose sweatpants and a hoodie. There's a Muslim family with children whose wife is wearing a hijab and they are not speaking English. And then you see a well-dressed, middle-aged, put-together white man. How do we think each would be treated if something happened? What would we think if something were stolen? If, God forbid, violence happened? It's not hard to imagine. But what if we saw those same people the way God saw? What if we saw that the black man was a well-known, respected, and loving physician who had just finished his morning workout and was buying fresh food before going home, showering, and heading to do rounds at the hospital? What if we saw the struggle and journey the Muslim family had taken to get to the United States and how fiercely proud and loyal they were to their new community and their new home? What if we saw that the white man was a pickpocket and con artist with a violent and angry history who had been in and out of jail multiple times? We may not be able to help the fact that we judge people on the first glance, but we can know that we do so. And thus we know that we need to not take that first judgment so seriously and take time to look deeper. We learn not just to see, but to see as God does. So Samuel went through after receiving this direction from God and evaluated each of Jesse's sons. But each time there was something that was just not right. Perhaps they had hearts with pride, anger or greed, dishonesty, lust. Perhaps there was a lack of faith in God or disrespect for God and God's people. Regardless, Samuel was at a loss when none of the 7 sons were chosen. Of course, I'm sure he paused and scratched his head. And then he asked the question, "Are all of your sons here?" Simple question. The answer shows that even Jesse was just as blind as we can be. He was so sure that one of the eldest sons was the one that was going to be chosen, he had not even bothered to bring in his youngest son from tending the herd. But once David comes, he is the one anointed as king. Now, I think every single one of us here know that David was flawed. We know that he struggled just as much from some of the very things I said: greed, lust, disregard for people, anger, murder. Yet David had a contrite heart, one that sought God despite his mistakes and his shortcomings. He was capable of humility, of contrition and restitution. He was capable of learning and growing. He was not perfect, but God looked into his heart and saw someone who would do his best to lead his people with wisdom, humility, and humbleness of heart. Thus David is anointed, and Samuel takes his leave. And we also take our leave of Bethlehem and fast forward a few hundred years to see Jesus and his disciples walking down the road. They come across a blind beggar sitting, doing his work of begging. Now this man is truly blind, as in unsighted. He can't see anything. He is unable to see who is approaching him along the road. He's unable to see the world around him. The first thing the disciples ask is, "Rabbi, who sinned? That this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, to us, this seems like an odd question. I would dare say that no one, or at least not many, in this day and age still believe that a person is born blind because they have somehow sinned. Especially not sin that was so bad that a baby is blind from birth. There's not really much trouble you can get up to in the womb. Yet this was a common thought in Jesus' time, as the Pharisees later tell the blind man, "You were born entirely in sins, and you're trying to teach us?" So the idea of sin and physical deformity or ailments were linked in the religious thought of the time. But Jesus, ever meddling, changes the paradigm. He says, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's good works might be revealed in him." So he was born blind so he could receive sight. Yet imagine what he learned living those first years of his life unsighted. He would have learned to function without it. All of his other senses would have been sharpened and honed. He would have heard better than anyone around him. His sense of smell was probably very strong. His sense of touch and of feeling would have been more than what we could imagine, feeling every vibration and knowing. He could probably tell you what was walking, if it was a dog, if it was a human, if it was a horse, by how the ground moved. What would he have learned from human nature just because he couldn't see? What secrets would he have known? For some reason, people forget that just because you can't see doesn't mean you can't hear. And people say many things in front of a blind person, not even thinking about that. His judgments would not have been based on appearance, but on what he learned about a person through how they acted and what they said. And I would venture to say that the man who was born blind was a much better judge of what was in a person's heart than those who were born sighted around him. And I think we see this in his response to the Pharisees. He certainly was not shy or timid. And he could not understand why they could not see that the one who healed him was a person of God. Just did not fit into how he understood the world. But they were blinded by their position in society and by their blind adherence to their interpretation of the law and by their hatred or jealousy of Jesus. But what made it more difficult for the Pharisees was not that they were unable to see if they wanted to, but that they were so blind to what they didn't know. They were blind to who they were, truly, to the prejudices that they carried, and to the sins they held on to without knowing it. So I'm going to take us back to the illustration I gave earlier. We make snap judgments, but these can be tempered and corrected if we know about our prejudices. If we know about what we have in our heart and can stop ourselves in our line of thinking and say, wait, I know this is here, so let me rethink that, knowing this. If we take the time to know the faults in our judgments, it becomes like our corrective lens. If we have taken the time to be introspective, to know where our thinking is racist, to know where it's sexist or classist or elitist or any other ist that is out there, we can learn to take that snap judgment and then say, okay, let me back up. We can learn to base our true judgments of a person on how they act, on what they say, and what fruit we see that is born in their lives. We can look more closely and recognize that famous physician. We can look and see that the hijab the woman wears is beautiful, and the one of her children is proudly waving an American flag that was given to them at one of the booths. We can see that the well-dressed man swiped an apple from the table of a local farmer when he thought no one was looking. But all of this requires not just sight, but truly seeing. We have to learn to see the world and others as God sees. And ultimately, the choice is ours: to be blind but see, or to see but be blind. Amen.